Get out of this line, now. The woman behind the customer service counter didn't shout it. She didn't have to. The way she said it, flat, clipped, the way you'd address someone you'd already decided wasn't worth the effort, carried further than a shout ever could. The entire departure lounge of Halifax Stanfield International Airport seemed to hold its breath. The young woman at the front of the line didn't move. She stood exactly where she was, a small canvas carry-on at her feet, a worn gray hoodie over her shoulders, her natural hair pulled back under a knit toque. She looked, by any measure, like someone who had no business standing at the platinum priority desk. And that was precisely what Janet Holbrook had decided the moment she laid eyes on her. What Janet Holbrook didn't know was what the young woman was carrying in the inner pocket of that hoodie. Something that in about 4 minutes would make Janet Holbrook's face do something it almost never did. Go completely, absolutely still. But before we get there, let me take you back to where it started. To a Tuesday morning in late November, when the sky over Halifax was the color of old dishwater, and the first real cold of the season had come in off the Atlantic overnight, the kind that settles into your bones before you've even had coffee. Adeyeze Nwosu was 26 years old. She was the only child of Nigerian-Canadian parents who had come to Nova Scotia 30 years ago with 2 suitcases and a shared stubbornness that bordered on the mythological. She was 5'4", slight, with a face that people routinely underestimated. Something about the wide eyes, the way she listened more than she spoke, the fact that she almost never raised her voice. She'd been told more than once that she looked younger than her age. She'd stopped correcting people. That morning she was wearing the gray hoodie, dark jeans with a small bleach stain near the left knee, and running shoes that had seen better winters. She had a red eye the night before from Vancouver, hadn't slept more than 90 minutes, and her connecting flight to London Heathrow boarded in 45 minutes. She had a seat in business class. She had not mentioned this to anyone. She never mentioned things like that. At the check-in hall, the economy queues stretched back nearly to the doors. The platinum priority desk, 3 counters set slightly apart, quieter, a low barrier and a simple sign, had 1 person ahead of her. Adeyeze stepped into that line and set her bag down and waited. The man ahead finished. He collected his boarding pass, gave the counter agent a nod, walked away. Adeyeze stepped forward. Janet Holbrook was 51, with blow-dried copper hair and the particular posture of someone who had decided long ago that her job gave her a certain authority. She looked at Adeyeze for exactly 1 second. That was all it took. This queue is for platinum members and business class passengers. I know, Adeyeze said. It's not the general check-in, I know. A pause. Janet's eyes moved to the worn hoodie, the bleach-stained jeans, the canvas carry-on. They moved back up to Adeyeze's face. I'm going to have to ask you to move to the appropriate line. Adeyeze looked at her evenly. I have a business class ticket. The words landed without drama, without edge. She said them the way you'd say the sky is gray today, simply because they were true. Something moved through Janet's expression, not quite disbelief, not quite embarrassment, something in between that quickly hardened back into authority. Then you'll need to show documentation. Of course. Adeyeze reached into her canvas bag and pulled out her boarding pass. Printed, folded once. She placed it on the counter. Janet picked it up, read it, set it down. Then she slid it back across the counter without looking up. This could be anyone's. Adeyeze blinked. It has my name on it. I'd need to verify it in the system. Janet's fingers moved to her keyboard but didn't begin typing. Which I will do once you step aside and let me confirm you belong in this queue. Behind Adeyeze, a man in a blazer had appeared. He was perhaps 55, silver-templed, the casual confidence of someone accustomed to airport lounges and priority lanes. Janet Holbrook's entire face changed. Her shoulders dropped half an inch. A small, professional smile appeared. Mr. Delacroix, of course. Just 1 moment. She did not look at Adeyeze again. Adeyeze did not move. She stood where she was, hands quiet at her sides, and waited. The thing people misunderstood about Adeyeze was her silence. They took it for uncertainty, for submission. for the particular smallness of someone who's been told so many times that they're in the wrong place that they've started to believe it. People who made that mistake usually found out eventually how wrong they were. She had learned this particular brand of patience. Somewhere between the third and fourth time, a professor had mistaken her for a student assistant and not the teaching fellow. Between the second and third time, a supervisor had praised her work in the meeting and then forgotten to put her name on it. She had learned to wait. She was very, very good at waiting. Ma'am. A second voice, male this time. A supervisor had materialized from a door behind the counter. He was younger than Janet, late 30s, the laminated badge of someone who'd been in the job long enough to know when a situation was developing. His name tag said, Philip Arsenault. Is there a problem here? Janet spoke before Adaze could. I'm asking this passenger to confirm she's in the correct queue. She's been resistant. Philip Arsenault looked at Adaze. His expression was neutral in the practiced way of people trained to de-escalate, but his eyes made the same quick calculation Janet's had. Hoodie, jeans, canvas bag. Ma'am, do you have your travel documents? She has a printed boarding pass, Janet said, before Adaze could respond. I need to verify it's legitimate. Adaze looked at Philip. My boarding pass is on the counter. My passport is in my bag. I have a confirmed business class seat on the 10:20 to Heathrow. The ticket number is there. You can verify it in under 30 seconds. Philip reached for the boarding pass. He typed something. He looked at the screen. Something crossed his face, a small, nearly invisible shift. He typed again, looked again. I'm showing, he began. That's not possible, Janet said. She had come around slightly to see his screen. Someone in economy must have printed the wrong. Janet. Philip's voice was quiet. Stop. The word was so mild that it took a moment for the instruction to land. Philip looked at Adaze. Mrs. Nwosu, I apologize. Your booking is confirmed. Everything is in order. Would you like to proceed? In a moment. Adaze's voice was still calm, still quiet. She reached into the inner pocket of her hoodie. What she pulled out was a card. Small, black, with a number and a logo and a name printed in silver. She set it on the counter. Philip picked it up. Read it. His eyes went to her face, then back to the card. He set it down and took a single, almost imperceptible step back. It was the card of the Deputy Director of Customer Experience for the airline's parent company. It had a direct line printed on it. It had a note handwritten in the corner, 3 words in blue ink. Call me anytime. It had her name on it, Adaze's name. Because the deputy director was the woman who, 8 months ago, had read an unsolicited 40-page internal report on systemic accessibility failures in the airline's check-in process. A report that no one had asked for, and that a 26-year-old consulting associate had submitted through a contact form at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. A report that had, in the month since, triggered a full internal review, 3 departmental restructures, and a pilot program in 4 Canadian airports. Adaze had never told anyone she wrote it. She didn't operate that way. But the deputy director had tracked down who sent it, and she had made a phone call, and she had said, I don't know who you are, but you are exactly the kind of person this company has been failing to notice. Philip was still holding the card. I'll be checking in now, Adaze said, if that's all right. Janet Holbrook was standing very still. Her hands were on the counter. Her expression had not changed, exactly. It was the expression of someone in the process of recalculating everything all at once, in real time, and not liking any of the numbers. Philip set the card down gently, like it was something that might break. Of course, Ms. Nwosu. I'm so sorry for the delay. He typed her in himself, printed her boarding pass, placed it in a small folder with the care of someone who was beginning to understand the precise dimensions of the mistake that had just been made in front of him. A woman 3 spots back in the general check-in queue had been watching from the moment Janet said, Get out of this line. She was maybe 30, dark coat, a toddler in a carrier on her chest, who had fallen asleep with his chin tucked down. She hadn't moved. She hadn't looked away. Her eyes were fixed on the counter with an expression that was equal parts anger and recognition. The look of someone watching something happen that they had felt happen to them, in different rooms, on different days, more times than they wanted to count. Adiez collected her documents, picked up her carry-on, and turned to go. She stopped. She looked at the woman with the toddler. She didn't say anything. She just looked, for one moment, the kind of look that passes between two people who understand something without having to name it. Then she walked toward the security gate. Behind her, the priority queue shuffled forward. Someone else stepped up. The espresso machine at the cafe 2 gates down hissed and steamed. The airport went back to its normal noise. But Philip Arsenault went back to the door behind the counter and made a phone call, a careful one. And Janet Holbrook spent the rest of that shift very, very quiet. The report went up the chain by Thursday. Adiez didn't file it. Philip did. He wrote 4 pages, single-spaced, and attached the CCTV timestamps. He had spent 2 days thinking about whether to do it, which is to say, he had spent 2 days thinking about the expression on that woman's face when Janet told her to get out of this line, and about the expression of the woman in the dark coat who had watched it happen, and about every other person who had stood in that queue and said nothing, because saying something had never worked for them before. He submitted the report on Thursday morning, copied the deputy director's office, and didn't sleep particularly well that night. The internal review took 6 days. It wasn't the first complaint on file about the Halifax priority desk. It wasn't the third. What made this one different was the CCTV, Philip's written account, and the fact that the deputy director had personally requested the file. The findings were not kind. Janet Holbrook had been with the airline for 14 years. The first complaint in her file dated back to 2018. A black woman traveling with her children who had been asked 3 times to confirm her seat class before being allowed to check in. It had been marked resolved. The second complaint was 2020. The third was 2021. Also resolved, also marked insufficient evidence to substantiate. The fourth and fifth were 2022. Same language, same signature on the closure memo. The review board interviewed 12 people in 6 days. Former colleagues, passengers who had submitted complaints that never went anywhere, a gate agent who had transferred to a different terminal in 2022 and described, quietly and carefully, what it had been like to watch that counter operate from a distance. Janet Holbrook was offered the opportunity to respond. Her position was that she had been following standard verification protocol. Her position was that the priority queue attracted fraudulent boarding passes. Her position was that she had been doing her job. The review board noted that she had not asked the silver-templed man in the blazer to verify his documentation. That detail was in the report 17 times. Janet Holbrook was suspended without pay pending further review. The airline's director of airport services flew to Halifax for a press briefing that had not been publicly announced, and that lasted 14 minutes. She said, among other things, that what the CCTV footage showed was not protocol. It was not acceptable. It would not be defended. She said this looking directly into the cameras, not at her notes. The deputy director called Adiez on a Friday evening. Adiez was at her kitchen table in her apartment in Halifax, eating soup and reading a journal article on transport equity policy. She picked up on the second ring. "I wanted to call you myself," the deputy director said, "before you heard it somewhere else." Adiez listened. "You handled that with more grace than I would have managed," the deputy director said. "I want you to know that, and I want you to know what we're doing about it, because you deserve to hear it directly." Adiez was quiet for a moment. "What are you going to do about the 5 complaints before mine?" she asked. A longer pause on the other end. "We're reviewing all of them," the deputy director said. "Individually. It's going to take some time." "Good," Adiez said. And then, because it was true, that's what matters. The CCTV footage was not leaked. The airline released a short-edited version themselves as part of a statement, which was unusual enough that it became a story on its own. The statement acknowledged what had happened in plain language, without the passive voice that usually cushions these things. No one was asked to consider the airline's perspective. No one was reminded of the complexity of large organizations. It said, "This was wrong. Here is what we are doing." Comment sections filled up anyway. Thousands of people writing things like, "I've been that person in that line," and nobody ever called it what it was. Thousands more sharing their own versions of the priority queue. Different airports, different industries, same split-second assessment, same instruction to move along, same calculation that they wouldn't push back. And underneath all of it, the question that kept surfacing, the one that the airline's statement hadn't answered and couldn't answer. What if she hadn't written that report? What if there had been no card in that pocket? No deputy director, no paper trail? What happens to the woman who stands in exactly the same queue, has exactly the same right to be there, and has nothing to pull out except her ticket? Which is already on the counter, which is already correct, which has been correct this whole time. Everyone already knew. That was the thing. Everyone already knew. Philip Arsenault was commended internally for his report. He was offered a senior operations role in Toronto 6 months later. He thought about it for a long time. He took it. On his last day in Halifax, he stopped by the priority counter on his way out. His own priority counter. The one he'd stood behind for 11 years. And he stayed there for a moment by himself, just looking at it. He didn't say anything to anyone. He just stood there, and then he left. Janet Holbrook's suspension became a termination when the review of prior complaints was completed. She did not appeal. Her lawyer sent a short letter that said she wished to focus on her personal well-being. She did not speak to the press. The 5 passengers from the prior complaints were contacted directly by the airline. Each one received a written apology on official letterhead, signed by the Director of Airport Services. Each one received a full refund of their ticket cost, regardless of when they had traveled. Each one was told, in plain language, what had been found and what was being done. 3 of them responded. 1 didn't want to talk about it. 1 said thank you. The third, a man named Owen Samuels, who had filed his complaint in 2018 and never heard a single word back, wrote 4 sentences. They were published with his permission in the airline's internal company newsletter, which went out to 40,000 employees. He wrote, "I didn't expect anything to come of it when I filed that complaint. I didn't expect anything to come of this either. I don't think I should have to be surprised that someone listened. But I am. I still am." A Daisy went to London. She gave her presentation to a conference on transport accessibility policy. It went 20 minutes over time because people kept asking questions. She took the red-eye home, slept on the plane, landed in Halifax on a gray morning that looked almost exactly like the one she'd left. She picked up a coffee at the same cafe 2 gates down from the priority desk, walked past the check-in hall without stopping, and went home. She does not think about it often. That's the honest truth. She has the next report to write and the one after that. She has a new dataset on accessibility gaps in regional airports that needs 3 more weeks of analysis. She has a mother who calls on Sunday nights and a father who texts links to news articles without context at 7 in the morning, and a cat named Obiora who sits on her keyboard when she's trying to work. She has a life. She lives it. She is not waiting for anyone's permission. So here's what I keep coming back to, and I need you to sit with it for a second. Adieze Nwosu was right before anyone knew who she was. Her ticket was valid when it was still on the counter and getting pushed back across. Her right to stand in that queue existed the moment she stepped into it, not the moment someone recognized her name. The card didn't create her right to be there. It just made someone finally see it. That's the thing that gets me. We live in a world that has trained us to look for the card, the badge, the title, the 3 letters after a name. And when we don't see those things, we make a very fast, very quiet decision that someone doesn't belong in the line, at the table, in the room, and we act on it like it's common sense. It isn't common sense. It's just a habit we haven't examined closely enough. Janet Holbrook didn't hate Adieze Nwosu. She didn't know anything about Adieze Nwosu. That's the point. She looked at a hoodie and a canvas bag and made a decision in 1 second. And because no one had stopped her before, because 5 complaints had been buried under the same signature on the same form, she had every reason to believe she could keep making that decision. We are all Philip Arsenault at some point, standing close enough to see what's happening, holding the calculation of whether it's worth the cost to say something. I'm not throwing stones. That calculation is real, and it's hard, and sometimes the cost is genuinely high. But I think about the woman in the dark coat with the sleeping toddler. I think about her standing there in that queue, watching, recognizing, and I think about every version of her in every airport and every lobby and every line I've never personally stood in. And I think somebody has to keep the camera steady, even when somebody tells you to stop. If this story meant something to you, drop it in the comments. Tell me your version of that queue. Tell me what you saw, or what you did, or what you wish you'd done. I read everything. And if you think someone needs to hear this today, share it. That's the whole point of stories like this one. Not to make anyone feel guilty. Not to score points. Just to remind people, including me, including you, what it looks like when someone is seen, and what it costs when they're not. New story every week. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. You don't need a card in your pocket to deserve to be in the room. You never did.